Thomas, it's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show.
Thank you.
So, I'm looking forward to getting into your life as a storyteller. And
Mhm.
before we do that, I want to know first and foremost, surviving this pandemic 4.5 years ago or so really made all of us pivot, changed so many things. How much of living through that time period has set waves that are still a part of your life now and your professional world?
I love that. So I'm gonna be honest. It I am one of those people who believes that we should not go back to how things were
Yeah.
before. I am someone who believes very deeply in moving forward and adjusting as much as possible. One of my great frustrations is when I hear people say go back to before COVID because my entire work is rooted in that moving forward, that like finding new opportunities to make things accessible, to get people into events, to find new ways to honor, really if someone's not even neurodiverse, just ways to make things accessible. And so when I hear people say go back, it's really frustrating, partly because we learned how broken everything was during COVID. And I think for me, it's going to change my life forever going forward.
So let me ask you this. There's a lot of things on paper that are a part of who you are, from being a storyteller, writer, business owner, advocate, sensory friendly event specialist, a community leader. But if we were to boil all this down, I put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at career day, and one of the kids wanted to know what you did for a living. How would you answer them?
So I love that. That's such a great way to look at it. I would say I am someone who tells stories, stories that make an impact, but also stories that make people feel happy, that help them to access their community better, and stories that are meant to honor who we are as human beings. So all of that is really just to say, my work is rooted in making sure people's voices are heard, they're appreciated, and they're valued, whether or not they have a diagnosis, whether or not they have, stuff going on in their brain, or in whether or not they're having a good day. And making sure that there are spaces that are comfortable, kind, and are going to treat everyone with respect.
My son's 20 and he's on the spectrum, and we've been in the special needs world for quite a while. And I'm always amazed every time, whether it's Special Olympics or it's another event, how everybody can come together and enter that bubble for a little while and just feel like everything's okay. The outside world with all of the things that they have judgments about and things, it just kind of all withers away when there can be this insulation of just celebrating just who we are as people.
Mhm. I completely agree. And I think there's always going to be people who roll their eyes when they hear about like equitable spaces or accessibility. And I think it just comes down to the idea that there's just a lot of bad representation around that. There's a lot of people I think who do great work, but they portray it in a very angry way.
Yeah.
And one of my great frustrations right now is the idea that being an angry advocate is being a good advocate. And there is truth to that. There are people who do great work when they're angry. But my primary frustration is that anger is not a tool that leads to good things. Anger is really a false power that people utilize to avoid certain situations and to have a temporary boost to what they want to do. In my opinion, having a calm, rational conversation, honoring where both people are at, and making sure that that conversation does not lead to someone trying to win or someone trying to overcome like a conversation or trying to change a mind. When we just sit down and talk and have calm, rational conversations about this work, I have seen that do far more power and also reduces the need for the other person to be defensive and to be angry themselves. I'm a big believer that anger leads to more anger, which ultimately leads to more shame, which leads to more misery, which leads to more judgment. And while there are people doing great work out there, but I don't think anger is the best way to really emphasize the beautiful pathway forward that is actually making things accessible for people.
Well, I remember that with Martin Luther, with Malcolm X in the beginning, a lot of what he was doing was fueled by that anger of what was going on. And then he took a page out of MLK and kind of rerouted to that realm of being more of a peaceful advocate. And it ended up being just a much better way for people to understand, you know? I mean, anytime emotions run high, you just lose the message. All of it's just going to get lost, you know? Um, so, what did you want to be when you were a kid? When you were in the third grade, say, what was your ideal life that you wanted to have?
So I was a lot of things. I was going to be a robotic engineer. I
Okay.
was going to be a storyteller. I was going to be the president of the United States. I was going to be a photographer. I was going to be a writer. I was going to be, the guy running the business, making sure that, I paid for my mom's, mansion that she was going to have someday because she took such good care of me. I'm proud to say that a lot of those things I've done. There's a lot that I haven't, but I've always been a big dreamer. And even when I work with youth to this day, I encourage big dreams. Big dreams are very important. Um, but the biggest thing that I'm doing right now, there's two things. One of them, I swore I'd never work in healthcare, which I do to a degree work in healthcare. The other was being a storyteller and a writer. And so far, I have done much of that. I am a storyteller. I am a writer. Ironically, I've worked in healthcare and absolutely love it, despite being a kid saying I would never do it. And I really believe it. There's something so ironic about this world that'll make you fall in love with something that at one point you never thought you would do.
So, let me ask you this. Take me back to your childhood, where you were born and raised, and what were these seeds that were planted into you to want to be a creative, to be an entrepreneur, to be successful? How were those woven into you?
So a big part, so I grew up on the East Coast in New Hampshire. I've loved stories ever since I was a kid. Before I could even read, I would insist like my dad and my mom would read stories to me. It was one of my favorite things. Um, the way that I phrase it is my story always began with stories. I've loved them ever since I was a kid. I've also wanted to be a storyteller. I'm really lucky in the fact that my family, despite all their struggles and everything, the mentality was if you want to do something, go out and do it and put in the effort in doing it. And you can literally do whatever you want as long as you prove that you can do it. And so, like, for me as a kid, I've loved poetry. I always joke, there's a lot of kids out there who are like, oh, I'm edgy, I'm goth, which is completely valid. I actually love that community. But I always joke, try being the kid at 5 years old who loves Edgar Allan Poe and The Raven so much that he challenges their teacher because he doesn't think they read it well enough. So that was me. I was also very much in the Green Day and like I know they have like a song that's something like The Long and Broken Road or something. So I was very much that edgy kid. But I had loved stories ever since because I understood at a very young age, stories are this great way to connect humanity. And so the first time I really knew I wanted to be a storyteller, I was at a festival, storytelling festival. My mom took me. I got to hear several storytellers and there was one individual. I love this stage name. Like I've always loved it. His name is Odds Botkins, which is such a storyteller name. Like that's like makes me think of someone in like medieval England going out telling stories and traveling, being that literal traveling bard. And he did a story of the Odyssey, voices, music, all the stuff done by him, and I fell in love with the story. Ever since then, I remember there were points when we would go on road trips, we would play the tapes, those old cassette tapes. I'm definitely dating myself a bit here. And we would listen to the Odyssey, and I'd get immersed. And I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. For a long time, I didn't believe I'd do it. I published books of poetry, written, talked about my experiences. I knew that my community needed voices, people would fight for it. But I also grew up in a lot of hostility. Schools deemed me too hard to work with. Some teachers told me I'd never go to college. Some told me I'd go to jail, especially struggling with my own mental health. But in all of that, I had writing, I had stories. And so as I got older, I decided I wanted to try to publish a book, got a book published, decided I wanted to go for a degree in poetry of all things, got a degree in poetry. And as I got older, I continued to share my story, became an advocate, writer, all this stuff. And then in 2021, at a point where I was really low. I think a lot of us with neurodiversity or mental health needs or something else know day to day there is a struggle, right? It's not just we want to be good, we have to put in the work, we have to put in the effort. One really bad day can throw us off in a really ugly way. And so I was at a point, I was really low, and I went, what can I do to change my life for the better? And I had a thought in the back of my mind, this like loud, resounding voice. I'm going to be a storyteller. In this low point, 2 weeks later, opened up my business, R&H Creative Advocacy and Storytelling. That was kind of just a whim. I just came up with that name on a basis. But ever since then, it's grown, it's blossomed. I've partnered with so many different people, done so many different events, helped people through my advocacy. And really, it's a sign that I was always meant to do this work because there's been so much beauty, so much promise that has happened. And like literally this last week, I got about 32 new requests for things. And I think what really helps me stand alone and apart in this work, well, not alone because there's so many people, but it stands apart is my understanding of the world, how it can kind of toss us aside but also that deep, resounding love for empathy and strengths-based mindsets and making sure people who are silenced get to raise their voice.
So let me ask you this. Who's been kind of your inspiration, your hero on your journey in your life?
So there's been a lot of them. So, one of them, Edgar Allan Poe, he is my literary hero. I've always admired his dedication to doing the work, whether or not making a ton of money. Um, on top of that, one of the things that's always, this might be a little unorthodox, but Dr. Seuss, he has that book, All the Places You'll Go. And that book has popped up in my life and has very much inspired me to chase my dreams. But there's always been a few people. My mother always motivated me to try. She's been very powerful, very supportive, and not be able to do a lot. But on top of that, I would say a lot of my motivation is really just the people I meet each day, the people I help, the people I inspire. A big thing for me is understanding with everything I've built, with all the people I support, if I go back to the way things used to be, I can't do that. I just can't. It's not an option. I can't give an into existential crisis because there's so many people, young, old, in their 20s, whatever, who look to me to support them, to create moments of joy. And so all of those people, whether or not they show up for one day or 10 seconds or whatever, they are my motivation to be my best self.
So let me ask you this. If you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now that's either a writer or creative or somebody out there that you find inspiring that you would love to hang out with that might help you on your journey, who would that be?
Hmm. I'm gonna do a little bit of curveball. I would have to say I would love to meet someone who is interested in doing the work, interested in becoming a storyteller, is probably set up to do it far more than me. But that person would most likely be someone who inspires me to take on new challenges and pursue ambitions that I never thought I would. I could go big, say Temple Grandin, or a big fan of Brendan Lee Mulligan, or even like Matt Mercer, who's really big in Dungeons and Dragons. But I think for me, those experiences might put me in like, I'm not significant enough to meet these people. But someone who is set up, who is a success and can push me further, that's probably the best outcome for me.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So let me ask you this. How do you feel like being in this realm of helping neurodivergent individuals? How are we doing in 2025? I know, and I mentioned with my son, I getting services and doing things. I have my opinion, but I'm curious what your opinion is on how we're doing.
I think so. I always say, I know there's a lot of people who would say like we're in this golden age of care or this golden age of mental health or neurodiverse care. Um, I think as we as people, I think we are very much in what I would call the Stone Age. We're learning how to use the tools. We're learning how to use them effectively. We're gaining information. But I think there's something really beautiful about that in that when I look back on the Stone Age, I look at it as a point in human history where humanity started exploring, experimenting, and learning on a great scale. And I look at that as a point where that motivated many great eras. I know there's a lot of darkness in the world right now. I know a lot of people are scared. A lot of people are worried. A lot of people are afraid. But I think if we're going to continue to learn, continue to expand, continue to explore, we have to also focus in on the good. There are so many people every day stepping up, doing good work. There are people running events, whether or not they're even just for people in the neurodiverse community. There are people putting good into the world. And I think there's a lot of organizations, not even just political, just like businesses out in the world that so much profit off of people's sadness or doom scrolling and things that we forget that every day there really is a balance to humanity and there is a balance to the level of empathy out there. And so when I look at it through that lens, outside of that doom scrolling political message or newspapers or all this stuff, I think we're at a point in human society where we're better than we've ever been, but we need to continue to get better. We need to learn, we need to adapt, we need to explore, and we need to understand how to use the tools effectively and with compassion and empathy.
So let me ask you this. How do you balance all of these things that you do that inherently will help people's lives, make them better, but you are also a human being that needs to develop and needs to evolve? How do you balance all of that? What motivates you every day to wake up to do this work?
The real simple answer is the amount of smiles that I see each day. The laughter, the inspiration. I would also say it's a daily effort. There are days when I'm unhappy, when I'm miserable, when I'm having a hard moment. And I think for me, part of it is understanding, and this is, like you said, my own personal journey. I have to understand myself. I have to practice self-acceptance. I have to make sure I take my meds, make sure I go to appointments, make sure I do all these things. But the other thing for balancing it for me, a big part of it is an understanding that I have a mission. I have something that is purpose driven. I have something that does put good out into the world. And I think for me, part of that is understanding that in all of the pain that I see, I can create moments of laughter. In all the worry I see, I can create moments of acceptance. And I think even when the days are bad, if I can look back and see someone who was once anxious jumping in and having fun and playing or writing something they never thought they got to, or just sitting there listening to a story, that really motivates me and inspires me to take better care. And the last thing I'll say is really this idea that it's not just the fear of going back. It's not just that. It's understanding that when you have a purpose, when you have a job or a work that appreciates you, when you have something that can motivate you to be better, you've got to cling on to that. You've really got to own that. There are so many people in this world who wake up who are miserable going into work. There are so many people who have jobs that don't understand them. There's so many people just wake up afraid. And when you have something that makes your heart full, and makes your mind excited, you've got to honor that and practice gratitude for that each and every day, many times a day.
So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran into a much younger version of you, say an 18-year-old version of you, you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've accumulated over time. What advice would you give your younger self?
Um, the advice that I give myself, I'm gonna say, the advice that I would give is in all of the bad and all of the good, there's a reason why these things are happening. I know so often, so many people, when things go bad, we don't think there's a reason. We don't think that there is a method to the madness. But I think understanding why something happens, why a purpose, or what even why something terrible happens, that can give us the power to react responsibly, to react rationally, and create a game plan to move forward. And I think what I would tell myself is also, it's gonna suck. It's gonna be hard. There are points you're gonna be miserable, but you have to understand in that moment, understanding why the bad things happen. You gotta move forward in that knowledge. Like, I know there are many times I've been there in some really dark points. But if you can get to the point when things are good and you understand why those good things are happening too, you just got to keep moving forward. Just keep going, just keep trying, and understand that there's power in that.
So, of all the storytellers that exist out there, who's your favorite?
Who's my favorite? That's such a hard question to answer. But right now, I'm gonna choose Dungeons and Dragons, and go with Brennan Lee Mulligan. He's part of Dimension 20. He's one of the founders of that. He's done amazing things. But I think the reason he is my favorite in Dungeons and Dragons is the level of empathy and understanding he infuses even into his non-player characters. I've joked with people, I hope he never enters into my field because he will put me out of work in like a day. Like I'm good at what I do. He's been doing this a lot longer. But even his stories, yes, he does, yeah, some political stuff in his stories, but at the end of the day, his characters are innately human. They are innately caring. They are innately sympathetic and appreciative. And the way that he captures humanity, even if the character is gone, like after 10 seconds, the way that he infuses empathy and humanity into his characters, and I'm sure it takes a lot of work, but he is one of the masters in my mind of creating side characters that have a lasting cultural impact.
So, of everything that you've done in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Um, there's so many things. I'm gonna have to say those moments. Those moments when someone who's scared or worried smiles and laughs. Those moments when parents feel relaxed enough, when they first time they come to an event to sit and rest and allow me to run a group. Those moments when someone learns to love a game, or those moments when anxiety gives way to joy. Those moments are inherently not just mine, but I help to spark something in them. And as someone who spent so much of his life worried, scared, and afraid, to see those moments and to watch people love learning or love playing or embrace those simple, joyous moments, that is, I think, the closest thing to magic that our world has. And in that, I think there's a beautiful resonating power in that.
So, at the end of the day, Thomas, everyone has a perception of you: family, friends, fans, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
My perception of who I think I am, is in all honesty, someone who is very flawed, who is working very hard each day to be better. But at the same time, I am someone who believes truly in the power of empathy, who believes truly in listening to others. And yes, I have my days where I may be a bad person, or I may be someone who needs to practice empathy and patience better myself. But the last thing I'll say in that is that I am someone who believes fully in the power of kindness and loving your neighbor and treating people with respect and dignity, whatever you want to call it. but also someone who gets to show up each day, gets to tell stories, and gets to live one of his greatest dreams.
So if anyone wants to pick up your books, they want to reach out to you, they have questions, they want to look more into all of these myriad of avenues that you're involved with, where's the best place to go?
So I can make sure my links are provided. I've got a link tree which will have a bunch of other stuff I do. You can also contact me at my email, which is ndttrpg@gmail.com. I'll make sure that's provided as well as my website. And I do want to say you can find me on LinkedIn, various other things as well. Make sure that's all provided. But I want to encourage you also to ask me questions. If you have any questions, anything you want to learn more about, anything you want to explore, even if it's a simple, silly question or you're a little nervous to ask it, I love questions. I believe they are a pathway to power, and I'd love to answer them.
This has been wonderful, Thomas. Thank you so much. I appreciate your story and time today. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.